This week's Piltch Point with Avram Piltch is proudly powered by PureVPN. Obviously, as the internet gets weirder and weirder, hiding your browsing history is becoming more and more important, whether it be from Google and Facebook or just your ISP. And a VPN like PureVPN is a great way to do that. And right now, for our viewers and listeners, they're running a deal where you can get for 2 years of service, you can get $2.88 a month instead of the normal $10.95. That is a 74% discount, which is a great deal. And to get that deal, all you have to do is go to pilchpoint.live/purevpn. So we've talked, I know, obviously we've talked a lot about the Raspberry Pi over the last couple of months because it's an awesome device with so many uses. But you have an interesting thing with it, right?
So I wanted to talk a little bit about overclocking, and the Raspberry Pi is a good example of something that overclocks. So here I have a Raspberry Pi 4B, and I have a fan on it. And now you too can get this from its native 1.5 gigahertz speed up to 2.147 or 2147 megahertz speed. That's a boost of more than 25%. Now, if you're not familiar with overclocking, you could do this to your PC as well. Raspberry Pi makes it really easy in that all you have to do is go into a configuration file, a text file, on the boot disk, change a couple of values to actually tell it to go up to this speed, and then also tell it to apply more voltage to the processor. So what are you doing when you're when you're overclocking? Well, what you're doing is you're forcing the CPU to boost to a faster clock speed, which means it's completing more cycles. It's getting through the tasks faster than it would at the lower speed. So most PC CPUs have what we call a base clock speed. Let's say it's let's say it's a Core i5 processor. The base clock speed is 2.2 gigahertz, but it also has an advertised boost speed that maybe will take it to 3.2 gigahertz or something like that. And what you can do with overclocking is try to force your chip to go even faster than the fastest that it's rated for. So a lot of newer PCs actually give you an overclocking options in the BIOS that are just automatic overclocking. You don't even have to think about how much voltage to apply or try and do anything manual. But of course, you need a processor that's overclockable. Obviously, with Raspberry Pi, everyone can be overclocked, but with a Windows PC, if you have an Intel CPU, it has to be unlocked for overclocking, which means it has to be a model with a K at the end of the model number. So like the Core i9-9900K is the top CPU around, and that is unlocked for overclocking. Similarly, if you're using an AMD Ryzen chip, they are all unlocked for overclocking by default, but they don't leave a ton of extra megahertz on the table. So you can get a little bit more performance, but not a ton by overclocking. And of course, there are people who will just do whatever they can to push the chip to the highest that they can get it. The key thing to keep in mind is it's very much about a couple of things. Cooling. So Raspberry Pi doesn't come with a fan. here I have this Pimoroni fan shim on it. Uh, it would way overheat being overclocked if I didn't have this cooling on it. Um, we have a writer at Tom's Hardware. His name is Splave, and he is a he is often, depending on the week, but usually the world's number one ranked overclocker, and he is a competitive overclocker. He he uses liquid nitrogen to cool CPUs to something like 80 degrees Celsius below zero, way below zero, in an attempt to get them to go to speeds that you just couldn't, normally get. Maybe you have a processor that's normally 4.6 gigahertz and he can get it up to 7 or 7.2 for a short time by pouring liquid nitrogen on it. Now, that's not really practical for your everyday person, and it's not really, when you're doing that kind of overclocking, you're just doing it to compete, to see how fast you can get it. You're not doing it to use. But everybody can benefit from overclocking. Um, you just need good cooling. You need a CPU and motherboard that support it if you're doing it on a PC. If you're doing it on a Raspberry Pi, check out my article on Tom's Hardware about how to do it, because it's really, really easy. But everybody can benefit. Now, it leads to the question of, why would you need to overclock something? Why doesn't it just come from the factory set at the highest possible speed? What are these companies thinking, giving me something that's not set for the maximum speed it can do? Well, the reason why is, when they manufacture CPUs at the factory, whether it's a Intel CPU, an AMD CPU, one of these Broadcom chips that's used in a Raspberry Pi, they're not all created equal. Five CPUs made in the same plant around the same time might have different maximum speeds that they could theoretically obtain. You might have something that's rated to go up to 4.6 gigahertz, but really it's capable of doing 5.5 gigahertz. But its brother or sister right next to it might only get to 5.2 gigahertz, because it's called the silicon lottery. Not all chips of the same type are created equal. So the companies know what sort of the lowest common denominator that they can guarantee that these chips will hit, and that's what they rate them for, and that's what they spec them to do. But what you can do is try to push yours to the highest it can achieve. So, you know what? I tried on 2 different Raspberry Pis, and I got to exactly 2,147 megahertz. Even 1 megahertz more than that, and it wouldn't boot. You you might get a Raspberry Pi that doesn't go any higher than 2 gigahertz. Someone else, who knows? I haven't heard of anyone, but someone else might be able to get theirs up to 2,160 megahertz before it becomes unstable and won't boot. So that's the fun of overclocking, is you've got to try to push your silicon to the limit, and you might luck out and yours might be a little better than mine. Professionals like Splave actually do something called binning, where a company, they can't afford to do this on their own, but there are companies that sponsor competitive overclockers, and they might send them 20 different copies of the CPU to test, and they do something called binning, where they figure out which ones go into the highest speed bin, which of these 20 CPUs you gave me is the best one, can go the fastest, and that's what I'm going to use competitively. So, that's what that's what the pros do. But you don't need to be a pro. All you need to do is explore the overclocking options in your BIOS. Make sure that you actually have hardware that supports overclocking, and you can get a little bit extra. And if you have a Raspberry Pi, you can definitely do it. Check out my article on how to do it on Tom's Hardware.
And obviously, like you said, one of the keys to making it work is cooling, because the more you put through it, the hotter the processor will get, and the more likely that it will just melt off the board. Not really, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
And in the last
good
couple of
news,
years,
I just want to say,
I would say in the last couple of years, we've gotten lucky as like the water cooling rigs have really become easy to deal with. It used to require like this big external radiator, and you had to refill it all the
yeah,
time. And now, you know, companies like Razer have these pre-made, snap them on,
yeah,
fill them ones,
an
kind of never deal with them.
all in one. Yeah, I think they even come filled a lot of time. But
Probably.
the thing is, what folks do need to know is that do not worry about breaking your hardware through overclocking. Modern CPUs are made to shut themselves off if they get too hot. So it's unlikely. I mean, if you push something to its limit, maybe your CPU will wear out sooner. Maybe maybe a couple of years. Maybe instead of lasting you, 8 years, it lasts you 4 or something like that. So or 3. Who knows? You're sort of giving it a little more wear and tear. It's true, but you can certainly get more performance, but your computer will not like melt or explode from you attempting to overclock it. If you push it too hard, it will simply shut itself off, to cool, or it will downclock itself. So there's a lot of fail safes built into modern chips, be they CPUs or you can also overclock your graphics card or overclock your memory.
Yeah, my brother has been doing overclocking for a while, and he told me he just did overclocking on his RAM, and I'm like that. Obviously, there's benefit there, but it is such a weird sentence to say out loud.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
obviously, it's super cool. Like you said, a lot of people can benefit from it. The reason why the computer that we use for the show is still in place and has not been replaced is because it was from the old AMD Phantom line, and so it had some pretty heavy overclocking capabilities built into it. It was AMD's early like consumer overclocking, and so we've kicked this thing up about 18% above what it is consumer rated for. Obviously, we've got water cooling and stuff on it, but this thing has way outlived its theoretical usefulness because those Phantom processors came out with Windows 7, so that this thing should not be able to power the show, but it does because of overclocking. So there's definitely some benefits out there. Well, I appreciate it, Avram. I have not read your article on the Raspberry Pi overclocking. I cannot wait to go take a look at that.
Yeah, so we believe that this is the highest anyone has clocked it to, because we're using the latest firmware. But if anybody beats it, please let me know.
Well, I hope. Obviously, one of the things in the competitive overclocking world is beat me. Right?
Yeah,
Bring it on. Beat me.
I mean, it's yeah. I mean, I have nothing but respect and just great admiration for people like Splave who just do this to push the hardware to its limit. There's something really great about doing something just to see what the maximum is, what the limit is.
For sure. Well, as always, Avram, I appreciate it. This is a fascinating topic, and I cannot wait to see what we talk about next time.